Hey guys. Okay, we're back. It's John Sottery. Today, I wanted to present episode number 2 of Leading Edge Health. And today, we're going to talk a little bit about vitamin K2, but I wanted to just give you 30 seconds of background, 30 or 60 seconds of background on me before we get started. And I think we have a few people that are joining. So the first thing, my background, I'm a scientist by training. I did my doctoral work at Duke back in the 1980s, finished up in 85. I'm focused on what I call leading edge health. And leading edge health is where you go out and you study the scientific literature and you follow the top researchers around the world. And you try to figure things out maybe 10 or 15 years before they become commonly known. So that's one of my missions in life. I'm a little strange. I spend a lot of time reading in the scientific literature. I read a lot on PubMed. I try to follow a lot of the leading scientists around the world, whether they're at Yale or they're at Harvard or they're at the University of California at San Francisco, wherever they may be. You try to find who are the top people, and then what can you learn from their research. So I see Sean has joined. That's great. I see a few other people here. That's great. So when I'm talking about leading edge health, for me, I think of all the people in my life, and I think, what do I know that I might be able to share with them, where that knowledge might actually change their life, or maybe it would save their life. And that means a lot to me. So my focus when it comes to leading edge health is I want to try to identify these things that are easy to do, these small course changes that you can do, and you can actually avoid hitting the health icebergs that can ruin your life, whether that be cancer or Parkinson's disease or Alzheimer's or prostate cancer or breast cancer. We all live in a little bit of fear that something's going to strike us down. And what I want to try to do is understand from the science, what are they learning and what can I do about it? How can I make smart moves? How can I, make things happen? So there are a lot of brutal diseases that are out there. So that's step number 1, is try to help people not hit the iceberg, help people make smart moves and avoid the iceberg. Step number 2 is, what can you do? What smart science can you do to reduce your biological age? I mean, obviously your chronological age, how many trips that you've made around the sun, that's pretty much set in stone unless somebody comes up with a working time machine. You have a certain number of times you've orbited the sun. But your biological age is very different. Because let's just think about your arteries for a second. If you calcify your arteries, you can be 40 years old, but your biological age of your arteries may be that of a 70-year-old. Or alternately, you can be 60 years old and you could have the arteries of a 35-year-old if you make the right moves. And so that's what we're going to be talking about a little bit. And you can influence that. So the topic today, before I get into it a little bit, I just want to let you guys know that everything that I'm going to tell you about is my opinion. I read the scientific literature, I follow the research, I try to piece the puzzle together. I'm not providing medical advice. It's up to you. You really need, whoever you listen to, you need to vet the information. You need to do your own research. You need to dig into it a little bit before you start making changes. Obviously, you should also talk to your doctor before you start making substantial changes to your nutrition, supplements, things like that. So we're talking a little bit about vitamin K2. There are several different forms of vitamin K2. And the 2 most common are the MK4 and the MK7. They differ in the length of the side chain on the vitamin. So. But why, and we'll get into that in a little bit, but why should you care about vitamin K2? I'll tell you why I care. And the three things are really cardiovascular disease, which is the number one killer. And if there's something that you can take that reduces the biological age of your arteries that will help you prevent and avoid cardiovascular disease, to me, that's a big deal. The second thing is cancer. I don't want to be diagnosed with prostate cancer. I don't want my friends to be diagnosed with prostate cancer. I don't want my family members to deal with cancer. So I'm always on the lookout for things that have a beneficial effect in terms of preventing cancer and like that. And the third thing is strong bones. I mean, as you get older, particularly for women after they go through menopause, it becomes extremely difficult to maintain the bone mass, the bone strength, and so on. So osteoporosis is a huge issue. Hip fractures for older folks, that's absolutely brutal, and that can be, it's just a road you don't want to go down. But also for older men as well. I mean, a hip fracture can really destroy their quality of life. They can't live at home. They have to be institutionalized. It's just a really ugly situation. So as I talk about vitamin K2, the first thing I want to talk about is, I want to tell you about three studies. I pick one that deals with cardiovascular disease, one that talks a little bit about cancer, and then one that talks about osteoporosis. But here's the interesting thing with vitamin K2, and that is vitamin K2 should be getting a ton of press. It should be on 60 Minutes. It should be on TV. You should be talking about it with your doctor. But because the science has only happened, let's say in the last 11 or 12 years, it hasn't made it through to that point yet. So the first study I want to talk about was called the Rotterdam Study. It was done in Europe. There were over 4,000 subjects, and they followed them for between 7 and 10 years. And they wanted to look at vitamin K1, which everybody knows. You get vitamin K1 from green leafy vegetables. And they looked at vitamin K1 levels of all these people. They looked at how much they were consuming on a daily basis. And they also looked at vitamin K2 on a daily basis. And they broke the group up they broke the 4,000 people up into three sections: the top third, the middle third, and the bottom third. And then they said, okay, we'll follow them for 7 to 10 years and see what happens. And for the vitamin K1, there was no correlation between their vitamin K1 intake and their risk of dying from cardiovascular disease. However, when it came to vitamin K2, it was pretty interesting. So the high group only got 41 micrograms a day of vitamin K1. Now, if you're not familiar with micrograms, that is 0.041 milligrams. It's a tiny amount of vitamin K2. But yet, the people up, Wayne, thanks for joining, and Dr. Bob Barron, appreciate you tuning in. It's good to see you guys. So I was just talking about the Rotterdam study, and real quick, 4,000 subjects. They followed them for 7 to 10 years, and they really wanted to see what the intake of the various K vitamins, how that would impact their risk of dying from cardiovascular disease. And as I said before, K1, no effect. They didn't see any correlation between their K1 intake and the risk of dying of cardiovascular disease. But when they looked at the vitamin K2, the top group, the top third that only got 41 micrograms a day, they had a 57% decrease in their risk of dying from cardiovascular disease over the next 7 to 10 years. And I remember the first time I read the Rotterdam study, I was like, what? Why isn't this on the news? Why aren't people yelling this from the rooftops? This is crazy. So if you understand how K2 works in the body, it actually activates these calcium transport proteins. And so it would make sense that there could be a correlation between K2 consumption and your risk of dying from cardiovascular disease. So they also looked at the calcification of the arteries of these subjects, and the people that were in the top third versus the bottom third had 52% less arterial calcification. So that seemed to, that really spoke to me. It really jumped out at me like that. So we talk a little bit about cardiovascular disease. Now I want to jump over and just talk about cancer. In this case, it's prostate cancer. And there was a study, it's called the EPIC Heidelberg Study. I'm trying to think. That was done about 8 years ago, I believe. And you might wonder why the study was EPIC. I know it was a really good study, but EPIC stands for the European Prospective Investigation into Cancer and Nutrition. They dropped the N because it was much cooler to be EPIC than EPIC-N. So again, they looked at vitamin K1 and they looked at vitamin K2. And they said, okay, we have 11,312 men, and we're going to follow them for about 8.5 years. And we want to see if their dietary K1 or if their dietary K2 has an impact on the risk of dying from prostate cancer. Again, with the K1, no knock on K1, you need it, but K1 didn't show any effect on the development of prostate cancer, either total prostate cancer or prostate cancer that was very advanced. Yep, Bob, I will do that. Thanks for the, that's coming up. Yeah. So they didn't see an effect, but with the K2, when they looked at the risk of getting advanced stage prostate cancer, which is a big killer of men, like breast cancer is a big killer of women, they saw an inverse relationship between the amount of K2 in their diet and their risk of dying from the risk of being diagnosed with advanced prostate cancer. So if you had high levels of K2, you ended up with a low risk of advanced prostate cancer. And if you had a low level of K2, you ended up with a very high risk of advanced prostate cancer. In fact, if you compare the top quarter versus the bottom quarter, sorry about the lighting, you saw a 75% reduction in your risk of dying of in your risk of being diagnosed with prostate cancer if you were in the top quarter versus the bottom quarter. Again, we're talking about trivial levels. A tiny fraction of a milligram per day made a difference of a 75% reduction in terms of you being diagnosed with advanced prostate cancer. And in fact, of the 11,319 men, 268 of them were diagnosed over the next 8.5 years with prostate cancer, and 113 had advanced stage prostate cancer, which would be the biggest problem, the least survivable. The third thing I'm going to talk about is strong bones. You need bricks, you need calcium to build your bones. Everybody knows that. You see advertisements on TV, they're going to they want you to buy Citracal or Osteocal or whatever, take calcium citrate, to try to build your bone. There was a study done in 2013, and the journal's called Osteoporosis International. And in this case, they actually had two groups, and these women were after they had gone through menopause, where your risk of losing bone mass is much more pronounced. They gave them 180 micrograms a day, so 0.18 milligrams, and they followed them for a couple of years, and they wanted to find out, does this small amount of vitamin K2, not K1, but the small amount of vitamin K2, does that influence bone loss? Will they perform any differently than the women that don't have the K2? And the answer was that the women that got the vitamin K2, even though it was a trivial amount, they ended up with significantly higher bone mineral content, significantly higher bone mineral density, higher bone strength, and they also didn't lose height as much as the other women. And it was pretty dramatic. So we talked about cardiovascular disease, we talked about cancer, and we talked about osteoporosis. How does it work? Well, I needed a calcium. I said calcium with bricks, so I went into my son's room and I got a calcium atom. It's a white Lego. So what happens is that you have these critical calcium transport proteins in your blood and in your bones. Two of the most important ones, one of them is Osteocalcin, and then the other one is matrix GLA protein, so MGP. When those proteins are created in your body, it's like having, there's a point on the protein where it's supposed to grab the calcium, but it only has one carboxylic acid group. So it's like having a finger, but having no thumb. So when those proteins are born, they're not activated. They can't bind calcium because you can't pick up a calcium with just one finger, okay? So what happens is vitamin K2 is actually a catalyst, and it goes through some involved chemistry and then gets regenerated, but it actually carboxylates that portion of the protein. So now you don't have just a finger, but now you have a finger and a thumb. You have two carboxylic acid groups on that point on the protein, and now you can chelate and you can transport calcium. And so if you think about it, you eat food that has calcium, whether it's dairy, whether it's greens, you absorb it in your gut. It has to go through the bloodstream to get to the teeth and to the bones. That's where you need the bricks. The danger is, do you calcify your arteries, or do you calcify your kidneys and end up with kidney stones, or do you calcify your heart valves? So that's the bad part. So you want your calcium transport proteins to be carboxylated so that they have a finger and a thumb, and that they can actually chelate calcium and transport calcium. And if that's not the case, then what ends up happening is your proteins are way under carboxylated, which means they're not active. And when they're under carboxylated, you're at risk for calcifying your arteries. You're also at risk for having very weak bones and having osteoporosis. And you also don't have the vitamin K2, which the MK4 version seems to trigger apoptosis of cancer cells, which is programmed cell death of cancer cells. So that's why I think vitamin K2 is a big deal, because I don't want to see my friends die from cardiovascular disease. A good friend of mine, Brian Wade, about a year ago had a heart transplant operation up in Boston, and he's doing awesome. But it's really challenging. If you damage your cardiovascular system, you put yourself at extreme risk of living a much shorter life. And my feeling is every one of us has children, or we all have people in our lives that are depending on us, whether they be children, whether it be your wife, your husband. And I don't want to see people, be ravaged by disease if it is, potentially preventable and like that. So Bob's question from before: where do you get vitamin K2? It's good, very good question. If you live in Tokyo, you are probably just doing great in terms of your vitamin K2 levels, because the Japanese eat a food called natto, which is a fermented soybean dish. And natto is the world's highest source of vitamin K2. The challenge is, of course, that people that don't live in Japan generally don't eat a lot of natto. So thanks for the, I knew, Bob, a little bit about your background, but I think K2 would help. In fact, I know another retired PhD who's gone through it, and I got his cardiologist to read all the papers on K2 and improve his calcium transport protein. I was just, Bob Barron had a question out there, and I think you definitely want to look into that. Hi, Jeannie, thanks for joining. Hi out to Chicago. So natto is the #1 source of K2 in the world, but yet we don't eat a lot of fermented soybean dishes, and in the US, natto is not that popular. I've been told it's an acquired taste. I've never tried it. So what's food #2 if you want to get K2 into your diet? You want to carboxylate your calcium transport proteins. You don't want to die of heart disease. And that is another one that's probably not on your plate, but maybe it is. And that's goose liver pate. Goose liver pate is the #2 source of vitamin K2 in the world. And in fact, if you read Paul Jaminet's book, The Perfect Health Diet, they talk about the fact that France has lower cardiovascular disease than you would expect. And then the part of France where they eat the most goose liver pate has the lowest incidence of cardiovascular disease in all of France, which is kind of interesting. So number 3 on the list, we're getting to things that you might actually eat, like a little, Chicago deep dish pizza or whatever, and that is cheeses. Vitamin K2 is produced by bacterial fermentation. And the bacterial fermentation usually produces the longer chain length K2. So the MK7, MK8, MK9. And that bacterial fermentation is key. So certain cheeses, depending on what bacteria is used to culture those cheeses, do have reasonable levels of K2. Not high levels, not nearly what you get in the goose liver pate, and a tiny fraction of what you get in the natto. But you can get, and that's the primary source for a lot of people, is the cheese that they eat. But it all depends on what kind of cheeses that you like. And you can actually go out there and look and Google and see which cheeses have more K2 and which have less. Thanks, Karen. So another food that a lot of people eat would be egg yolks, and egg yolks also contain K2. I believe that's the MK4 version. Animals tend to produce the MK4, which has 4 units on the side chain, and then bacterial fermentation tends to produce the 7, 8, 9, and so on. So natto, which most people don't get, goose liver pate, which most people don't get. So most of the people in the U.S. are relying on cheeses and on egg yolks. But if you think about it, let's say you were trying to be extremely healthy for the last 20 years, and you followed conventional wisdom in terms of nutrition, they would have told you, do not eat egg yolks and do not eat cheese, because those are bad for you. And yet, those would be your primary sources of vitamin K2. Now, you can also supplement with vitamin K2. And one of the questions that people come up to me a lot and ask me, I know it seems like a weird question, but John, should I take MK4, where I have 4 of these units on the side chain, or MK7? And the answer is really both, because they're transported differently in the body and they nurture different tissues in the body. MK4 seems to be particularly good for the brain, if you're a male, for the testicles. MK7 seems to be key in terms of concentrating in the bone, and it helps you to activate your osteocalcin. It also tends to concentrate in the liver. Oh, hi, Allie. Thanks for joining. So if I know one thing you might be thinking is, hey, John, I'm a vegetarian or I'm a vegan. How am I supposed to get vitamin K2? You can get it by fermenting your own vegetables if you're into that. So Dr. Joe Mercola, formerly in Chicago, I think he lives down in Florida now, he actually has done some work looking at different bacterial cultures and seeing which ones are really good at producing K2. And I think they sell that so you can actually make your own kimchi, or you can make your own fermented cabbage or whatever, and you can get all the K2 that you need. Before I forget this, a lot of people around the world now supplement with vitamin D3. And that's a good thing, because the only way you can make vitamin D is photochemically in your skin. So, you have to get a UVB photon, and I won't get into it, but you have 6-dehydrocholesterol, you have to break the ring. And a lot of people don't get a lot of sun this time of year, particularly in Chicago or Maine or Philadelphia, because the sun has to be relatively high in the sky for you to make vitamin D. When it's low in the sky, the ozone layer filters out those wavelengths between 290 and 320 nanometers, and you can't make vitamin D in your skin. So your vitamin D levels drop. So a lot of people take vitamin D, that's a good thing. But the challenge is, if you take vitamin D, you're going to bring up the calcium level of your blood. And that's also a good thing, but you don't want those bricks to end up in your arteries or in your kidneys or on your heart valves. Bob, I don't know on the fermented beets as a source of K2. As long as the beets originally contained K1, I believe that's the starting precursor that the bacteria then convert into K2. So I'd have to look into that, but that's a good question. So given what you know about K2, and just to be clear, everything that I'm telling you is my opinion. I'm not providing medical advice. I'm making you aware of things. I want you to go out and research them. I want you to vet them. I don't care who tells you something. You should dig into it before you start to practice it. And the other thing is anyone that takes warfarin, which is a vitamin K antagonist, should never do anything to change their vitamin K intake. That means don't start eating 3 times as much kale or green leafy vegetables, because that's going to change your K1. You also don't want to start taking K2 if you're on warfarin unless you work with your doctor. So what happens is, if you work with him, he might say, okay, take the additional supplement. We're going to measure your INR, and we will titrate the dose of the warfarin, because warfarin is a K2 antagonist. They've done work in animals, and they show that when they put them on warfarin, they start to calcify their arteries, which is pretty brutal. But if they increase the K2 and then increase the warfarin, they can get them to decalcify. So to summarize quickly, you want to have thumbs on your calcium transport proteins, because if you don't have a thumb on there, you cannot chelate calcium, and those proteins won't work. As I start to wrap up, I would like to throw out there, let's see, the problem with leafy greens is the oxalate. Yeah, that's a good point, Bob. Yeah, and you might be better off, instead of doing the leafy greens, you might be better off supplementing with a K2, and something with both K1 and K2. I believe that you should be targeting for somewhere between 100 and 300 micrograms a day, based on the data that I've seen. There's a right now, as we speak, there's a double-blind, randomized, placebo-controlled study where they're looking at vitamin K2. It's the MK7 version. It is 360 micrograms. So they're giving people 0.36 milligrams a day of K2. And then they're doing multi-slice CT scans to look at the calcification of their arteries. That data should be available at the end of 2017. Now, I'm guessing most of the people that are on this video are probably not in that study. But I guess the question I would ask myself is, based on what you know about vitamin K2, and based on the work that you do when you look into it, would you rather be in the group that gets the 360 micrograms of vitamin K2, or would you like to be in the group that gets 0 additional micrograms, and they're the ones that get to calcify their arteries, or worse, to prove that, in fact, it is effective? So I only read you 3 studies. There are probably 15 or 20 studies, but I know if I went through 20 studies, you guys would all be in a deep coma. So I wanted to offer, and I'm happy to take questions as we go. I'm just gonna, I wanted to reference a few people. The first person is Dr. Paul Jaminet and his wife, Dr. So-Ching Jaminet. They're a couple of Harvard PhDs. They wrote the book called The Perfect Health Diet, which I think is extremely well researched and extremely well written. And to me, that is the most significant book that's come out in health over the last 20 years. It's called The Perfect Health Diet. And another person I'd like to mention is a young scientist, Dr. Chris Masterjohn. Chris did his doctoral work at UConn, did his postdoc, and then was a professor at Brooklyn College in New York. I think he left last month in January just to go out and start providing content for people that are trying to improve their health. And he has the best vitamin K2 resource on the web. So if you go to chrismasterjohnphd.com, he's done a great job pulling together the research, translating it from the scientific studies into English so it makes more sense. I also wanted to say to you, I'm a big believer that if you get the right piece of information at the right time and you make that course change, I believe way too many people are hitting icebergs in their life, health icebergs, that cause incredible amounts of pain for them and for their families. And so I want to do collision avoidance. I want to try to figure out the chemistry and the biochemistry around things that happen that are good and do more of that, and try to understand the biochemistry around the bad things and try to avoid that. So if you know someone in your life where they've had kidney stones, or they have their heart valves are calcifying, or they have, they've done some CT scans on their arteries and they have a calcium buildup, you might want to share it. And ideally, you share it even earlier on so that never happens. The best way to avoid hitting the iceberg is, just never hit it. I mean, steer south and get into warmer waters where you're not going to hit the icebergs. So, but if you do find this helpful, if you can, click on the like button and, share it with some of your friends or some of the people that I would very much appreciate that. If you want more content like this, if this is useful to you, please go to my professional page on Facebook. It's Dr. John Sottery. I think I'm the only John Sottery in the world. I don't think they planned it that way in terms of URLs, but it worked out pretty well. And I would really like to hear what you guys think. I'd love to see your comments and questions. I will try to respond to them quickly. Subjects that you'd like to hear more about, things that you'd like to talk about. I would love to engage with you. And if there's anything that I know that might help you or someone that you love to avoid cancer or heart disease or some of these things that are just brutal. I have seen people go through chemotherapy. I've seen people that were very close to me, deal with radiation treatment and deal with a surgery and go through that. And it's brutal. So I would personally, whatever moves I can make to steer away from those icebergs, I'm going to do that. I see a question from Bob. I have not read that protocol, secondary progression of MS with dietary interventions, and is done for many others. That's a good point, Bob. I'm a big believer that says that most people have inflammation in their gut, and when you have inflammation in your gut, the junctions open up and things cross over that aren't supposed to. So you're supposed to get individual amino acids coming across, but if you can get peptides or larger things coming across, the immune system looks at those and says, these are foreign proteins, and starts attacking those. And so I think a lot of autoimmunity comes back to people that had some kind of gut issue and they have permeability, things cross over, and then your immune system is like your special forces. And when they target something, if that pattern, if that sequence matches something in your thyroid, or if that sequence matches something in your pancreas, you will get collateral damage that way. Now, I'm going to look into this protocol. I'm not sure what she's getting or what the doctor's getting at, but I'm very interested in learning more about it. If you guys have any other questions, but please, shoot me a comment, ask me a question. Love to engage with you. This is the focus of my life right now, is to try to mine the 10.2 million articles that have been indexed on PubMed in the last 15 years, and find those little gems that you can use to potentially transform your health. So I want to thank everybody for all the great questions, and I want to thank everybody for tuning in, and I really appreciate it. So until next time, thanks you guys.